Everybody, welcome to another exciting event hosted on marketingops.com alongside the MoPros community. I'm going to let everybody trickle in. I will be sort of like looking this way a lot of the time because that's where the presenters are. I know my camera's here, so forgive me for not looking straight at you all the time, but please engage with us in the chat. Let us know that you're here. We would love to hear from you, hear where you're at. Let us know that you can hear me. So just go ahead and use that session chat on the right-hand side of your screen. Some other housekeeping items while we're getting started today. Please use the Q&A tab to ask your questions. It helps us manage which questions have and have not been answered a little bit more easily. We certainly can pin some of your questions from the chat, but if you can, please use that Q&A tab and we'll try to manage it from there. I am joined by Elise View, Sierra Evans, and Scott Marcellus, and we will be jumping into the topic in just a moment. So thank you all for joining, and thank you, Synchry, for helping us put on this wonderful session. The rest of the panel will be led by Elise. You might hear from me a little bit. I decided to join and talk a little shop with them, but for the most part, you're going to hear from these two wonderful experts. So, Elise, I'm going to let you take it away, and let's get going.
Yeah, that sounds great. Where do we have everybody joining from? Put it in the chat. Would love to see. Elise, hello, Elise.
Hey, Elise. Connecticut. Just kidding. Connecticut. Costa Rica.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Canada.
I love it.
Wow.
Wow. All over the place. Tampa, Seattle, Irvine. Shout out to my Irvine people.
Oh, wow. Truly people all over the world.
There's my Colorado peeps.
All right. Well, very cool. Welcome, everybody. Sounds like we have everybody from around the world, so I'm really excited for today. For those of you who are just joining us, we are really excited about today's topic. And before I even dive in, would love to just start with introductions, just so that everybody knows who's who. So with that said, I'm Elise. Thank you, Mike, for introducing me. For those of you who don't know me, I have been around, currently spearheading Synchry's community efforts. That means bringing together ops pros like yourself to learn and level up together. And then previous lives has really been in essentially marketing and comms for startup to enterprise companies. And so with that said, I'll pass it over to Sarah to give us a brief bio of you and where you're at.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. Good morning, wherever you are. Sierra Evans. I am currently in beautiful downtown Austin, Texas. So I am a customer success operations professional, and I came about that profession through a variety of kind of weaving career choices. So started out my SaaS career in professional services, led a team of PS experts, then moved into managing customer success managers in our enterprise segment. And beyond that, had an opportunity to take on an operations role, supporting both customer success and sales. We had operations, enablement, RFP writers, a whole variety of functions beneath my group there. So that was a decade of my career at the same company, an online banking software company. And then I pivoted to join a revenue operations startup for a short stint. And I've recently joined Thousand Eyes, which is a Cisco company. I'm in week 3, so y'all take it easy on me with the Thousand Eyes knowledge, but customer success operations manager here at Thousand Eyes. Great to be with y'all.
Awesome. All right, Scott, tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm Scott Marcellus, and currently I'm at Conga, but right here, this is Boulder, Colorado. Where I started off in my career as far as operations was actually in film. So I was a producer in television and direct response sales, and then moved my way into a more digital realm to where I was leveraging my background in physics and programming to actually build marketing technology tools. So further on to that, I really got into Marketo and that community there. So anybody's in Marketo, hey, what's up? So they nominated me as one of the Fearless 50, which is super, super really cool designation in their user groups. And then now I'm currently here at Congo, where I manage all of our sales and marketing technology and part of that revenue lifecycle piece.
Awesome. Very exciting. I know, Mike, everyone already knows you, but would love to hear your 2-sentence bio of your experience in ops as well.
Oh, my 2-sentence bio. Yeah, my 2-sentence bio is I've been in marketing operations for over a decade, but also have moved into different growth roles. I think one of the beautiful things about being in marketing, revenue, and sales operations, even client success operations, is that you get to see a lot of the foundational pipeline that is needed in order to run a revenue org, which can lead you to different career paths as well. However, I am still deeply in love with marketing operations, as you can tell. And so today I run marketingops.com and the MoPros community. So thanks, Elise.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited about today's topic. So as we all know, in the last year, 12 months, we've been seeing this surge in PLG, or rather product-led growth, right? And as a part of that, companies are beginning to get the surge of data, right, into their systems of their users, their customers, potential customers, etc. And today's topic is really going to talk about the top tips to activating that product usage data. Because I think across the board, what we're seeing is that there's this challenge and this obstacle of accessing and extracting this data to turn it into something that is actionable for their internal teams or cross-functional teams, right? So as a part of that, today's panel, we're going to talk about why and how has this emerged, this challenge, this new challenge, perhaps, maybe it's always been around, but it's starting to become more of a common challenge across teams, is that we now have this data. And so how do you access it? How do you pull it? How do you serve it up to your team members in an actionable way? How do you overcome it? And so, especially when you are in a state where you have limited resources and you're strapped for time rather, and you have all this untapped data. So today's going to be interesting because we have Sierra and we have Scott and we have Mike who have seen this over and over and have figured out ways to overcome it. And so, with that said, a few housekeeping items is please drop any questions you have for Scott, Sierra, or Mike in the chat. Let us know, raise your hand, and we'll do our best to answer those questions. We'd probably like to take questions as they come, so feel free to surface them. If we get to it, great. If we don't, please continue to put them in there, and we'll circle back as soon as we can. So with that said, we're going to dive right into the panel of questions. All right. So that said, Sierra, I know you have talked about your experience. Can you share with us a little bit more about your status quo? And, in terms of that, how would you summarize organizations' product-led growth strategies that you have worked on in the past, and what did that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question, Lise. And as you talk about, this becoming kind of a new problem that people are faced with, being flooded with product usage data. I remember early in my career working for a SaaS company that had no telemetry and no product usage data available to us. And so now with the flood of wonderful data that we have at our fingertips, it can be difficult to translate that into actionable insights, as you stated. So a couple different ways that I've seen product-led growth leveraged at companies. My previous role at a revenue operations company, we had a component of our product that helped sales reps update Salesforce in a more frictionless way. If anyone's ever been in sales and had to do the administrative overhead of updating Salesforce, you probably have felt this pain of clicking through multiple different objects and finding the field that you need and double or triple clicking and wait, did I save the page? And so this product gave us a really simple spreadsheet-like way to update Salesforce. And what we did with that product was actually a freemium model where we allowed people to come in and sign up for it for free. And we really were hoping that those signups, those reps that were signing up were saving so much time and found enough value through the product that they were recommending it to their peers. And so in that way, we were hoping to upsell licenses of that product and then, of course, expand across our other feature sets and products that we offered. So that was one way that I've seen product-led growth happen. And in my first few weeks at Thousand Eyes, I understand that we're also doing a PLG motion in which Thousand Eyes software is actually bundled with certain Cisco hardware packages, such that there's a small number of free licenses that are bundled in. And the hope there is that we then have an opportunity to expand out further in the account. So just a couple of PLG strategies that I've seen employed.
Yeah, I'm going to tap into that a little bit. It's funny because I say hope. I heard you say hope a lot. And for me, it's so funny because in my marketing world, I think hope is not a strategy. Hope is not a strategy, right? So I would love to hear more about that, as you think about all of these hopes and dreams and desired states of getting your customers to a desired state. What were some of the processes that you helped to move those along to get your customers and or users into essentially a buyer state or a cross-sell mode?
Yeah, for sure. There are many ways that you can tackle that for sure. But taking kind of the first example from the Salesforce update product, as a sales team saw that we had a viral kind of event going on within an account, for example. So we had 5 users one week, and okay, all of a sudden we're up to 7 and 10 and 12. We're observing this trend and we're seeing that we're building some traction there. And so through that, then we had an opportunity to reach out to some of those users at that account. And hey, I notice you're using the product. I notice you're loving it. I can see that you've referred some friends. Thank you so much for that. Who would I talk to within your operations team about getting this feature, this product sold more broadly across your sales organization? Do you think this could help others within your team, right? So just leveraging that data to really enable that kind of next conversation.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's even like the foundation to really firepowering your inbound strategy, right? So I like that a lot. Scott, tell us about your experience across organizations that you've worked for in terms of a PLG strategy and what you've seen.
Sure. Yeah. So I can talk pretty closely and intimately about Congas. So Conga really has what they call a customer lifecycle or revenue lifecycle cloud. So it's really CLM based, and then as it integrates with Salesforce to build out exactly how you want to do even CPQ, cost price quote, like things like that. So they're very related in the ability to actually help teams like legal and operations build that really fast, easy UX for revenue, right? So as far as like translating from one to the other, we do sell things like, Sierra was saying, is like companies tend to bundle things together, right? Like kind of like what Conga does. You buy one thing, you're essentially getting the whole thing, but then you're giving those freemium pieces away. It's almost exactly how we do it here at Conga as well. And then when people sign up and they're trying to do different things, it invites conversation, et cetera, for the AEs. So that is very much a tactic that we employ. But on top of that, there's some other things that we actually do specifically with the Synchrony tool itself. And that is what Sierra was mentioning with telemetry. We actually feed in non-PII data through telemetry to actually do what we just call saying, hey, let's aggregate a bunch of data in a population. And we say, okay, now what is the probability that this person is actually going to need these products here in the future? So we do those quarterly and monthly meetings along with CS to say, hey, this is the information, this is the intelligence, and here's what our idea is for it. So we do that with our data science team and myself included, and some people in sales operations to perform those functions. And it's actually helped us improve our cross-sell opportunities like 200 to 300%, which is actually really fantastic. So it's very, very exciting when telemetry starts to feed in and starts to be a conversation piece inside of that life cycle piece or life cycle stages.
Yeah.
Opportunity conversations. So that's kind of a few things that we employ as well.
That is like really cool. Like hundreds of percentage points. Is that what you said?
It's radically different. So like, I mean, the history of Conga is that, we were one company and we're acquiring businesses right now. It's a really good opportunity for us in this current macroeconomic environment for us to be doing that. So now when we're aggregating in all this IP from other companies, now we have to say, okay, who are our customers really? We have like all these other pieces from other companies come in. So one really quick way to do that is through a central core and improving our data core. So how we do that is a probability based, almost kind of very similar to a homegrown recommendation engine that you would find like Netflix. Oh, I like watching Stranger Things, so you're going to recommend me this. But we do that with our product base, and then we do that based off of conversation information to CS, which is actually super cool. So that's some of
it. I was thinking of folks like Jessica and a number of others. Like, I know these conversations come up. Like, there's a few folks in the community that are going through M&A processes right now, and I'll bet you they would really love to double click into that in a deep level with you. So watch out; they might come reaching out to you.
Welcome to have those conversations. It's very, very much like, oh, I had to find one of those books from college to say, okay, how did you do that? And like, it's like one of those things. Oh, that's what standard deviation means. So we're actually in that meeting, which is super cool. So
it's so cool. I was thinking as you were talking about that, how might that differ from quote unquote lead scoring?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, like, that's the hard part. It's almost like, oh, everybody's like worried about lead scoring. So like whenever you think about lead scoring, it's I'm scoring a lead before they're converted and associated with an account. But then what happens after that? Right? That's always like everybody's issue is like, well, when they become a customer, do we have a customer score? Do we have a person score? Like, when do they reset? When does this always happen? And it's really based off of the telemetry activity and the influence types of things that we're getting from other tools like Sixth Sense. It's all in aggregate is how we score people as one, not just necessarily a future customer, but what do they look like after that? And how are they using our products? It's actually where we can actually employ different types of methods of saying, hey, customer marketing, these folks are your core users. Let's start building webinars and different types of tactics with them because they're actually had this problem last week. They tried to click into something, and this goes back to telemetry. They tried to click something into the product that they couldn't use, or they were attempting to use. Let's bubble this up as a conversation. How can this improve our roadmap, our product roadmap? So that's one thing that our CEO, Noel Goggin, he really wants us to act together cross-disciplinary. And one of these processes is how we do that. We call it the Conga way, actually.
That's really, really neat. I'm curious, sorry, just to ask a little bit on the tech stack side of things for the two of you, maybe just Sierra, if you could share just a little bit of your tech stack. I heard Salesforce, just some other components, because there's a lot of inputs you need in order to fuel something like Scott is talking about. And those inputs usually come from lots of different tools and then hopefully somebody trying to align the data points, right? But just like high level, like what are the top 5 or so, if there's that many, or if there's less, great, but I'd be surprised.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Salesforce is always a key part of any good revenue operations team sales tech stack. So yeah, I would say like Pendo and Amplitude are a couple things that I've seen used pretty widely on the product data integration and aggregation side. And then as it relates to kind of feeding it into a CS team, which is my specialty, often you're looking to plug that data into whatever your customer success management system of record is. So whether that be Gainsight, which is one I've worked with in the past, or Catalyst, which is something we're evaluating here at Thousand Eyes, it's really critical to serve up that data to your end audience. We've also worked on a project where we integrated a very high level of usage data into Salesforce itself, which can be useful across the enterprise.
Very cool. And Scott, what about for you? Just the handful of tools there.
Yeah, I mean, like Sierra, I mean, Gainsight is really great for that. I mean, I think the other one that our customer marketing is using in its employ is Reference Edge. We've seen like some really cool stuff with that. Just helps spur the conversation with partners, which is a lot of that conversation piece around product. And Marketo, I mean, we use it all the time. But, as, Elise was saying, it's one of the core places where we do our scoring. And Syncery is starting to become one of our major tech stack pieces, just from how we connect everything together. I mean, it's beginning to allow everybody to talk, not just in acronyms, which is acronymagaddon.
There's so many nuggets we have to pull out of this already. The Congo way, acronymagaddon.
Yeah, acronymagaddon. Actually, somebody said that on a call earlier. But anyway, I stole it, so I'll have to.
That's okay.
No, but it's
good reference.
It's one of those things where it's like, hey, that's what the product's used for. Everybody lives in their own area, and SME of each area. But what's the core look like, and how do we all speak and get a 360-degree view of the customer? And that's how the customer actually can promote your product and do those cross-sell opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Give them that faith, right? That them.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for sharing that. I think it's always helpful for some of our listeners and viewers to have a sense of like, oh, I've got some of that stuff happening. Now where could I go next, right? How do I operationalize some of this data? Shameless plug, Syncery. but no, seriously, that it is helpful to understand what are the inputs so that you can try to do something on the output side of things.
Yeah, and it's so cool to hear how Scott and Sierra are using essentially their data, right, to activate their customers in meaningful ways, right? And so to me, in that same vein, as you think about all those processes and experiences, what are some of those KPIs that you're looking for or you're tracking for across, whether that's CS ops or marketing ops? And I guess we can go back to Sierra.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there are a ton of metrics available. And I think that's where a lot of times we get into this challenge of the insights not being actionable because people can drown in this data. It's a very deep and broad data set. And so it is somewhat germane to every company in terms of what exact user behavior you're looking to drive, what features you're looking to drive. But high level logins are typically like pretty standard across most SaaS companies. Utilization for specific features, user growth, how many unique users, and is that number increasing? Things like dwell time, even sometimes the administrative stuff, like how many reports or how much data is being extracted out of our tool can be valuable. So again, it really depends on your product and what exactly you're looking to drive toward. There are a lot of very specific metrics to Thousand Eyes that are, very networking oriented. So just depends.
Awesome. And I'm just going to dive a little bit deeper on that too. When you have those KPIs, right? And I think you talked briefly about it earlier, but how does your team then take that and turn it into actionable data for your internal teams or cross-functional teams? And what does that look like?
Yeah, for sure. That's the $1 million question. That's what everybody's trying to do with this information. One framework that we used in a past company was a terrible acronym again, but it was called EPU, entitlements, provisioning, and usage. And that terrible acronym tends to at least stick in your head. So the way that we kind of broke this down was out of how many entitled seats a customer has, how many of those seats are provisioned? So looking at that on a percentage basis and saying, okay, this customer, is only 70% provisioned. What can we do to get them to use or provision out those extra 30% of their seats? You being usage, looking at daily active usage, weekly, monthly active usage, depending on your product, and then making, an assessment there like, hey, we're really seeing low monthly active usage for this particular feature of the product. Let's get in contact with that customer, understand what might be driving some of that. What are some of the enablement efforts that maybe we could help that customer with Do they need training? Is it an onboarding issue where they were never completely onboarded well? Is it an issue where we just need some refresher training because maybe they've had a lot of attrition in their organization? Things like that. So I think leveraging that framework, that entitlement provisioning usage framework, gave us a really good common language, first of all, internally, and as we talked with our customers. And then it gave us, a way to communicate back out to the team, like these are the specific ways that you should be actioning those metrics.
Yeah, I think that's so important, right? Because especially during these times where you need to have a customer health pulse, if you will, it sounds like what you're doing really helps detect potential churn, right? Or even, take a look at potential customer opportunities for growth or expansion. So I think that those are really key areas as you help to grow the team or even think about the customer's growth strategy as well. So that's really cool. I like that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just add too, you can also have the inverse scenario where a customer is over provisioned, and that can be a great opportunity to go true up your contract and have a nice upsell.
Yeah, I'm wondering, based on what you've seen, Sierra, how many companies or like the percentage out there do you think are actually doing this? I'm just curious to hear your thought, because I've been in places where we had nothing set up, and then I've been in places where we were starting to deploy those kind of processes. And to be frank, I think, it's such a desired state, but it takes time, right? And patience.
Absolutely.
And so I'm curious to hear what you think on that.
Yeah, and every company is on their journey, right? It's purely iterative. It's something that you're going to set up, and then guess what? A new feature got deployed by product, and you're looking to understand, how that new feature is impacting the whole landscape. And so I would say every company that I've worked for is on their journey, and various stages of maturity around it. But and it's, like I said, it's a huge data set, so it's really difficult to get it right. And there's a ton of opportunity for iterating.
Yeah, got it. Scott, what are your thoughts on KPIs, and what are you guys measuring on the Conga side of the world?
So one of the things that we have in our roadmap, as far as like what I was talking about earlier, was new product release telemetry. So the feedback to our product team on how we analyze that telemetry data and get it back and forth and saying, okay, is there a lot of upsell opportunities? Is there, Sierra was saying, what is this relation to churn? That's kind of what we do now. But how is the product reacting to the new market? And then how does that correlate to, initial NPS? I would think that NPS is also one of those scoring pieces that could go into something like this as a KPI, obviously. But how we're trying to do that over time and actually put that back into the hands of the AE is extremely, it's a head scratcher. We're still trying to figure that out on our side. And just because NPS is just, very statistical, right? You have one very small sample set out of the population, and then you're just saying, okay, well, it's this score. Well, that may not correlate to actually what the telemetry data is actually saying. So what is then the truth around that? How is the product actually really performing in the eyes of the customer? And you can't really do that unless you just have conversations. So that's when we say, okay, correlate between those two pieces, and then start to have conversations with the customer on an ongoing basis. And that usually starts with the CSM.
Yeah, to me, it's so amazing that you're able to tap into that kind of data and detect it early on, because I would imagine the worst thing you want to happen is 6 months down the road and you're wondering why customers in the red, right? And maybe they never even logged in once into the platform or into the tool. And then by the time they're red already, they've already found a different tool or a replacement, right?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of actually getting somebody on, and then you sign this annual agreement, right? And everybody's like, oh, it's a 1, 2 year, 3 year agreements. They're going to be customers forever or whatever. They're going to be a 2-year customer. It's like, no, every customer that comes in that is now a customer, it's our job, and it like on our team is to make sure that they are super fans of Conga. That's like our sole purpose. And once they're super fans, then that becomes the viral activity of saying, well, I can't do my next job in my next company without these tools. I have to have them. So they advocate for us. So it's just, that's really the whole premise of understanding that telemetry data as it comes in. It just gives us one more thing in our quiver to say, hey, how do we make you a super fan?
I'm curious, along that same vein, how do you think product usage data is correlated to making your customers super Conga fans?
Yeah, like as far as product usage,
Mhm.
yeah. How often? Like, it goes back to the point Sierra was saying, like, how often do they log in? How much are they using the tool? Like, are they doing anything on Twitter around how they're using Conga specifically? Like, it's every different piece of what they say, what they do, and how they act with it. Even that goes back to feedback, just with CS and their CSM, and having those biweekly conversations. What's the temperature, right? How do we react to that? I think the mainstay though is just like Sierra and her team, and how they measure that is login data and usage and deployment, really around enablement. Are all the licenses used? How many are left open? What do we do with those folks, and what is that conversation? Like, hey, how do we help you get everybody a license and get everybody educated on the product? Like, what can we do to help you? Right? Those are the conversations, not like, how come you're not logging in? It doesn't help anybody. It's like, how do we help enable you and your team make the best use of the product? It really starts with that question.
I think that's smart, right? Identifying the problem and then identifying the solution to it, because you can look at data all day long and say, okay, great, these folks aren't logging in. Let's figure out a solution. But if you don't actually carry it out and deliver it through CS and work with other cross-functional teams to provide a solution in your process, then that's where you're going to hit the same stump again, I would imagine.
And key question is how. That's a non-threatening question that people say, oh, well, here's the solution. And then they've solved it already for you. And you say, okay, I can do all those things. But yeah, that's how we're trained to start, just by asking the question, how.
Very cool. Mike, in your 10 plus years of experience, are there any other KPIs that you would add to what Scott and Sarah have already mentioned?
No, I think, I think the two of you pretty well covered it. I think it also sort of is it depends type of conversation as well. Early days when I was we certainly weren't like calling it product-led growth or anything like that. We were just trying to understand, user journeys and all of that in the product. And we were leveraging tools like HubSpot, or maybe in your case, Marketo or Pardot, to try to trigger emails based on in-app activity for a SaaS application. A lot of this is very applicable primarily to just SaaS applications in this context. But that's really hard to do. And so for us, we had to go through a whole bunch of discovery on, like, do people even use the trial? Like, is it worth our time to try to like activate them in the product if they're not really getting enough value out of the trial? And so once you figured out that why, it started us down a path of, okay, well, what data do we need to collect in order to be able to answer that question? And so again, like going back to this idea of it depends, our why for tracking product usage data ended up being trying to answer the question of how do we activate somebody through the trial, which was only like 7 days at the time for the product I was working on. And so, just try to like start with a question, figure out what your why is, and then try to figure out, how to have those conversations with your teams to capture that data. And that's the hard part too, right? Like, engineers need to understand what it is that you're going after. And so if I could just like add a, I don't know, random hot tip, like if you can write a user story, like as a user, and you're sort of this internal user to the organization, as this user, I need to do this because this is what I'm trying to accomplish. There's a whole template for this, and I did not recite it verbatim, so don't quote me on that. But I would encourage you to go look that up, right? Look up what a user story template is. Atlassian has a great document on that. and figure out how to write that so that you can work with the teams to gather the product usage and information to go answer those questions. Because that's incredibly difficult, I think the two of you, it sounds like you're far enough along using some of the tools that are available to us today to be able to start manipulating and moving data around. But, fundamentally, there's definitely a large number of us that are still trying to figure out, like, how do I even do that? How do I even start collecting this information? So sorry, I went on a tangent, but hopefully that was helpful for someone.
You're totally right. Like it is overwhelming. I mean, like part of us in like marketing operations, even sales operations, is to make, the complex easy, right? Mm-hmm. And like our users are SDRs, VDRs, CS. And so like we are the filter, right? And it's daunting because you're like, where do I even begin? Mm-hmm. Like that is really the hard part. It's like, oh, it's kind of like writing a book. It's like, oh, I know I want it to be 300 pages, but what's my first word? Right. It is exactly like that. You're totally right.
Yeah. And I think, oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Mike, that really resonated with me, your comment about writing user stories. I think we've talked a lot about how product usage data can be very germane to a company, but it can also be very germane to a specific customer and a specific use case. Mm-hmm. What is the problem that they're trying to solve through your product? And so I think that's where a lot of times those are one-on-one conversations between sales or CS and the customer to really understand what is that value you're hoping to derive, and then being able to capture that, document it, and provide that insight back to product. Sometimes you can do that effectively through data, and other times, it takes a more qualitative kind of approach to, get product on board with the true value that the customer is trying to realize. So really love that you mentioned that.
Well, cool. I'm glad it was insightful or helpful or whatever word I'm trying to find.
I think, Sarah, that brings up a great point, right? So if a customer comes in for, say, for example, a specific challenge or business case, right? And you're tracking the product usage data, how then are you able to map that back to that service being delivered, right? From a tracking standpoint. And I guess my question to that is, how easy is it to track that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, right? I mean, again, I would go back to kind of depending on that specific customer. As operators, we tend to be very macro and zoomed out, and we're looking at data aggregated across entire customer bases or entire segments of the customer base and trying to kind of glean insights to that. But sometimes the approach can be a little bit more ground floor, where maybe we are seeing some insight in the product data that tells us a story. But maybe that's not telling us the whole story. And so while this quantitative element is really important for that macro zoom out view, there's always a little bit more to it that, the kind of ground floor, the partnership, the relationship can offer from an insight perspective. So I think it's important, Scott mentioned NPS. That's certainly one mechanism to gather customer feedback and sentiment. There are numerous other survey mechanisms. Conversational intelligence has really blown up in the RevOps tech stack space. It's a huge area of development that I think is just going to transform the way that sales and customer success are done ultimately. And so there again, a huge wealth of data from the mouth of the customer specifically that we can tap into.
Yeah, I think that ties nicely back into what Mike and Scott were saying essentially is we don't know what we don't know, right? And with that, where I'm going with this is, as where you guys are sitting in what you're seeing across the board, across functions, how do you think the marketing, sales, CS teams could better use the product usage data that you have, whether available or in general, to activate that data and use it across their functions?
I'll take a quick stab, but as we were developing our process to integrate some of the product usage data into Salesforce, we went on a bit of a roadshow and we interviewed folks from marketing, folks from our customer enablement team. How would you guys potentially get value out of this data? So certainly, we've talked about some of the marketing functions. You all are much more marketing operations experts than I, but looking at some of those user journeys and identifying points of friction or points where, maybe they were logging in consistently for a week or a month and then they just stopped. So re-engaging deactivated users was a big area of value that we were hoping to realize. And then even on the customer enablement side, where we were looking at how to better train our customers through, scaled programs, not just one-on-one, hey, let me sit down and demo you the product, but how can we create a video series that we put in the hands of customers and prospects such that they can understand, how best to leverage the product. So, and using that product usage data as like, a springboard to understand where some of the friction points were and what we might focus on. So those are just a couple of ways. And I think the number of ways is limitless as the imagination, right? I think that we're, again, just kind of starting to scratch the surface on some of these use cases, and there are probably tons more.
Yeah, very interesting. Scott, have you seen anything else on your side?
As far as like looking at information, and I was just reflecting on this while Sierra was talking about it, but like places to start, and how to do it is just having conversations with CS. And if your BDR, SDR team, your AEs, are they talking on a regular basis with that CSM to the people that you've sold to? Because ultimately it's going to come back to those sellers to actually, upsell or cross-sell them information. So I would really just start with that and just say, hey, are they logging in, or how many license do we have? It just starts to spur the conversation inside the business. And then, those types of questions are the things that are going to provide value, not just to the business, but actually to the customer. You're going to say, hey, we're really actually trying to do our best to help our customer or retain our client, right? So it's all about that. I can't, and Sierra, you might laugh at me, but I've never met a CS first event and say, hey, can we talk about the customer? They'll be like, yeah, we totally. Or some of them be like, well, it's lunch and I don't have time. But I've never heard one that denied that question, especially when it says, okay, well, let's just start aggregating some of this information. And even if it's not really readily available from product directly inside of any sort of tech stack, at least the conversation is happening. And then those are the places to where we can really start putting customer initiatives first. That would be that. I've seen that happen to me in smaller organizations before I started Comp, and it was fruitful.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And in that same vein, I'm curious to hear, from your lens, what do you find are often blockers to having these kinds of conversations, or, to even creating those video series for customer enablement, for example?
I would say it's more along the lines of prioritization and change. I mean, really, people get into a day-to-day battle rhythm of what they're trying to do. And they say, okay, well, how do I make this change? And you have to have some internal champions that really say, okay, this is the priority, is the customer. It's priority to have these conversations. It's a priority to get this data readily available. I would say that it's a priority conversation as opposed to anything else, especially when everybody's working 50 hours. They're like, well, it's one more thing that I have to fit in. But no, it's what they forget is, no, it's actually the customer and their information that's supposed to come first. So that's how we do it at Conga, is we move everything else out. We say, oh, this is customer related. That's number one. That's P1. We're going to have these things.
Yeah.
So it's really a shift of culture. And how can you become a culture leader to shift it in that direction, to really put the customer first?
I think that's a great point. I think, Mike, you put in a really awesome question in the chat too about how many of you have regular discussions with CS ops and client success managers. And I was thinking of you, Sierra, is I think oftentimes for even me, having to be at the very top of the funnel, if you will, that we oftentimes forget to have a conversation with the CS team, right? And oftentimes we say, okay, well, if we want to know more about the customer, let's just go talk to the customer. But customers are busy too, right? They don't have time to talk to us all day about their NPS score when we can send them a survey. Or actually, they don't even make time to take an NPS score, right? Survey.
Yeah.
And we see that in the click-throughs and open rates. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, Sierra, is what do you think that other teams aren't doing enough of as it relates to CS teams, CS ops teams, and with CS ops teams? I think that's also a great question.
Ah, yes. The age-old battle between sales and CS. But honestly, I would take a little different twist to that. I would say that what we are not doing enough of is actually gathering and aggregating customer insights in a system, in a shared location where people can access them and glean solid information from them, right? It takes time out of sales day and CS's day to sit down and have that one-on-one conversation. Not that we shouldn't have those conversations, right? But like if we can answer 80% of our questions through the system, by all means, we should strive to do that. Things like, what was our last engagement with the customer? How did that go? How's the customer sentiment at that time? What have they purchased? What are some of their upsell opportunities? What's their health? What are our relationships like within that account? Are we broad? Are we deep? Do we have a single point of contact or a single point of failure within that account, right? So there's just a lot to be done around aggregating all of this various information around customers that lives in various systems. And so that, to me, is what gets me up in the morning and makes me pump my fist in the air around ops, because there's just endless problems to solve around that.
Yeah, 100%. I think even for me today as a dream state is looking at any customer profile record and understanding who the POC is and the last point of engagement. I think that is still a dream state. And if you have an awesome team like Scott, then you probably have that profile. With that said, though, I'm so glad you brought that up, because Scott, I wanted to ask you too. And I think we're starting to hear more of Conga getting there, is essentially how are you and your team using Synchrony to activate your product usage data?
Sure. So where do I begin? So I can make this I can give you the truncated version. So how we're identifying, for our marketers, I'll talk about enablement for a minute. So marketers really on our team struggle to understand saying, okay, well, we have so many bundles, and part of our product suite is vast. You can buy individual things, and like Sierra was saying, you can bundle things together. So they have certain bundles. So if you look at everything in a pie chart, all the pie pieces are kind of different. Like grandma always cuts them different sizes, maybe one a little bit too big than the other, right? But in reality, it's all about how do I push that information using Synchrony back into Marketo. And this is to really start to build nurture programs, almost like what Mike was saying, like, hey, we're trying to trigger something inside of a marketing automation system to actually put them into a long-term, short-term nurture, whatever that has. Timing is really related to that, what it may be. So that's like step one, is like saying, okay, marketers, here's the customers, here's what they have. Number two is the telemetry piece, which is a little bit separate. How often they'll log in? What's the enablement of that? How many unused licenses do they have? Or are they fully utilized, right? Like things like that are supplementary to that, but we use all of it in aggregate to actually come up with that. So how Synchrony works and how we do it is we activate all of that, pass that back into Marketo from each one of our products. So currently right now, it's tied to things like SFTP, which is super old school, but it's one download sheet and it's updated on a period basis. We're moving that into a very API related state. Synchrony has the ability to create custom synapses, which is something that we're working with the engineering team at Synchrony on to actually connect every one of our products with telemetry. So, and that acts in real time. When there's something that's triggering, it actually updates the data set and the unified data platform, and then pushes it down, normalizes the information, pushes it down to the respective endpoints that we choose. And that communication, and after that build, that whole process is making sure it's running great, enablement. How do you talk to this information? What does that mean to a new SDR, right? So all of the training is, I would say, is paramount to that. So you can put like a square peg in a round hole, but it really doesn't make much sense. So that's really right now where we're focusing, is not so much moving data from one point to the other, but it's really giving the training and the documentation around how we're communicating that, and how we're pushing the information into each, which is the most important thing to us. So I would say that's how we use Synchrony. We're actually working on our custom synapses, but now we're pushing all that information into Marketo outreach to create custom sequences, custom nurture programs.
Great. And then along that same vein of custom sequences and custom workflows, if you will, as you think about a future state, what would that ideally look like for your team?
Oh, I would say future state for that is definitely the telemetry. Once we get the telemetry in there, it's automatic to custom sequences around cross-sell. And based around what we were talking about before with what I was talking with Mike was the probability, the recommendation engine of when to move somebody into a certain sequence to make that conversation piece more worthwhile. So that's what we're finding is you can talk, we're still talking at people when we're putting them automatically into nurture sequences, but not talking with them. So the probability and the timing around that type of information, whether it's from bump war or whatnot, is actually really viable.
That's so interesting. So John Wall wrote in chat, and he said, so cool to see how much product management is seeping into demand gen, vice versa. In theory, the biggest winner in all of this is customers, users. And as I listen to you talk about your experience, Scott, I think about what you just said is you're, talking with customers versus talking to customers. And I feel like in the last 12 months, there has been this trend of us just talking to customers and talking to potential buyers, right? But not essentially talking with them and taking the time to understand who they are, where are they in their journey with us, and reinventing that wheel. And I'm starting to see this trend as I talk to you, Sierra and Scott and Mike, about how we are actually becoming smarter marketers because of this usage data. Smarter CS teams, smarter sales folks because of this usage data. And so I'm just mind blown right now. But Mike, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, no, John, I agree with you on that comment. The amount of opportunity to work cross-functionally in an organization has never been greater. There's more data than we know what to do with, but there's more access to the data, which is why we don't know what to do with it, which is just like fundamentally a big shift. And, I think the common thread through the majority of this conversation today still had a major people element to it, not just, who are we talking to on the customer side and how are we learning from them? But you heard, at least I tuned in to sort of the elements of Scott and Sierra saying, I have regular meetings, like once a month, I don't know how often they happen, but regular meetings with these folks to try to understand what's going on in their world, and try to enable them, and then try to learn, what additional pieces of data we need to ingest in order to operationalize the sort of revenue funnel, right? But none of this happens without the people behind all of the operational programs, out there. So, the technology is enabling these operational folks, but at the end of the day, you still have to have those discussions, right? You still have to have those team meetings to get alignment and all this stuff, defining those rules and all that stuff. I have to say, I'll share a link to this in the chat for all of you. I recently got what we fondly refer to as the no bullshit demo of Synchrony. And I think there is some fundamental changes around the way in which they think about just unification of data. I think one of your taglines is something like the source of truth, the single source of truth is dead, I think is a thing that was said a few times, or at least mentioned to me. And I think that concept is really interesting. I was thinking about this morning, not because this panel was happening today, but just in general, the landscape is shifting. Ownership of data inside of a silo, like a Salesforce environment, or a HubSpot or a Marketo or something like that. At the end of the day, they've got all of your data. So you're literally just copying it and pasting it somewhere else. And, this motion of CDP and standardizing and data warehousing and all this stuff, I feel like my eyes have been opened more recently by tools like Syncery, where we're saying like, look, we don't own your data. It's being moved around from place to place. And that's a totally different thing, right? We're just saying these are all your inputs, and it also needs to be standardized, true. And there's a process that you all established with your teams in those regular meetings to say that this one wins in this situation and this input wins in this situation. But the only way that you can do any of that is, yes, you have to have technology that enables it, but you have to have the people behind the scenes that understand the business, that understand the customer and the journey that you want to take them on in order to establish that. So yeah, if I could add to it, it's just, you've got an incredible opportunity as a CS ops, sales ops, revenue ops, marketing ops, you pick your ops title, person, to go leverage all these tools and establish that unification. It's really exciting.
I think as I'm hearing you all talk more about it too, I think about it in a concept that Scott's team has introduced to our team is, can you Syncery it? Right. And the reason why I think that's so cool, and the reason why I look at it in that way, is if you think about all of this product usage data that you're pulling together, an ideal state that would be really cool, even just as I think about it, is having your functional teams go and essentially Google it within your tech stack, because all of the data is there. So before you even reach out to a prospect, before you even reach out to a customer, all that data is there. And that's where I think the Sierras and the Scotts of the world really surface the data for us marketers on the marketing side to really have those meaningful conversations with prospects and customers. So I know we are 2 minutes left. With that said, Scott and Sierra, if you could give advice to other operators who are just getting started in this area of pulling product usage data, what would your tips be?
Start small.
One day at a time.
Limit your scope. Yeah. I mean, bite off just a tiny little bit and, work on ensuring that you have accuracy, comprehensiveness within that one KPI that you're looking to measure. We didn't touch on data privacy, but that's a huge macro trend that impacts usage data. So there's just a lot of implications and a lot of work to be done. So start small. Don't overwhelm yourself.
I would completely agree with you, Sierra. I was mentioning my grandmother's pie slice. I did that, but then I also remembered the book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, right? It's like one data point. Hey, what do you guys think of this? Is this meaningful? Well, yeah. Well, can you do this? Can you do this?
Give me more. Yeah.
And then you can say, okay, now I can control the no and the yes. And then I can build my strategy around that. So yeah, if you give a mouse a cookie, just start with one thing.
Yeah. My favorite thing to say in every engagement I ever have with my team or their orgs or whoever I'm talking to is aim small, miss small. And I definitely stole that from a movie. But yeah, I think that resonates greatly with me too. So aim small, miss small, and keep trying.
Yeah. Awesome, everybody. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think we learned a lot today on product usage data, how to achieve that and overcome it. So please reach out to all of us. We are all on LinkedIn. You know where to find us by first name, last name. And yeah, we'll be around. So reach out. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.